"I'll pay your family $100K if you read Italian letter," jeered the mafia boss at the young waitress, his crystalline blue eyes fixed on her trembling hands as she balanced the tray of drinks. The restaurant fell silent, patrons suddenly engrossed in their meals as tension electrified the air. Bailey Porter clutched her notepad tighter, her mind racing with calculations. Her mother's medical bills, her daughter's daycare fees, the eviction notice taped to their apartment door. The stranger's cruel smile widened as he watched the internal struggle play across her exhausted face. "I don't speak Italian," Bailey whispered, forcing herself to meet his gaze, surprised to find something unexpected lurking behind the coldness, a desperation that mirrored her own. The other men at his table shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances loaded with meaning she couldn't decipher. Jack Kalari leaned back in his chair, designer suit accentuating broad shoulders that carried the weight of Cleveland's most feared criminal empire. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the yellowed envelope before him, each beat matching the rapid thrum of Bailey's heart. "It's not Italian exactly," he replied, voice dropping lower as he slid the envelope across the table toward her. "It's Sicilian dialect, old family script that died with my grandfather last month. A dialect I never bothered to learn because I was too busy building my empire." Bailey's eyes narrowed with sudden understanding. This wasn't about humiliating a waitress. This was about something far more personal. Her manager hovered anxiously nearby, silently pleading with her not to engage with the notorious customer, whose patronage kept their struggling restaurant afloat. "Why me?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady as she placed his drink before him, careful not to touch his manicured fingers. The ice clinked against crystal, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed dining room. Jack studied her face, his expression unreadable as lightning flashed through the windows, momentarily illuminating the scar along his jawline. "Because you look like someone who needs money badly enough to enter my world, but honest enough not to betray what you might find there." She should have walked away. Every instinct screamed for her to return to the kitchen, clock out, and run home to her 3-year-old daughter waiting with the elderly neighbor. Instead, Bailey found herself reaching for the envelope, its paper warm as though the secrets inside were alive and breathing. "You'll have a week," Jack informed her, watching as she carefully tucked the envelope into her apron pocket. "My address is inside, along with half the payment up front, enough to make sure your mother's treatments continue without interruption." Bailey's blood turned to ice water in her veins as her gaze snapped up to meet his. "How do you know about my mother?" she demanded, suddenly aware of how much research this man had conducted before selecting her for whatever dangerous game he was playing. The smile that spread across Jack's face never reached his eyes, which remained as cold and calculating as a predator's. "I make it my business to know everything about people who might become useful to me, Ms. Porter. Your mother's cancer, your daughter Zoe, the fact that you're 3 months behind on rent." The restaurant's ambient noise faded to white static as Bailey processed the full implications of his knowledge. This wasn't a random encounter or cruel joke. She had been specifically chosen, researched, and targeted by one of Cleveland's most dangerous men. "What's in this letter that you can't take to a professional translator?" she asked, instinct telling her the answer would determine whether she walked away or dove headfirst into whatever darkness swirled around Jack Kalari. The weight of the envelope seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. Jack's expression shifted, revealing a momentary glimpse of something almost human. Vulnerability, perhaps, or regret. My grandfather's last words, containing a truth that could either destroy my family legacy or transform it completely. Not something I can trust to just anyone. The rain hammered against Bailey's apartment windows as she carefully unfolded the brittle pages after her daughter had finally fallen asleep. The foreign script crawled across the page like ancient spiders, beautiful, yet impenetrable, carrying secrets from another time. Half of the promised money, $50,000 in cash, had been tucked between the yellowed pages, more money than she had ever seen at once. Bailey spread the bills across her kitchen table, each one representing a piece of her mother's treatment, her daughter's future, a temporary escape from drowning. Morning light filtered through threadbare curtains as Bailey researched Sicilian dialects online, discovering that what Jack had dismissed as merely an old family tongue was actually an endangered language. The dialect was specific to a small mountain region outside Palermo, nearly extinct with fewer than 100 fluent speakers remaining worldwide. Bailey reluctantly called her mother's doctor, arranging to resume treatments that had been paused due to unpaid bills, careful not to reveal the source of her sudden financial recovery. The receptionist's voice changed immediately. warmth replacing clinical detachment when the prospect of payment materialized. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number Jack had included with the letter, half hoping it would lead nowhere, that this entire situation would dissolve back into her normal, struggling existence. A deep voice answered immediately, as though the man had been waiting by the phone, expecting her call. The sleek black car that arrived to collect her seemed to absorb the morning light rather than reflect it, windows tinted so deeply that Bailey couldn't see the driver until the rear door swung open. She hesitated on the curb, the weight of her decision pressing down on her shoulders like physical hands. Jack's estate sprawled across several acres on the outskirts of Cleveland, old money architecture contrasting sharply with the modern security system that tracked Bailey's movement from the moment the gates swung open. Guards positioned discreetly along the driveway watched her approach with expressionless faces. The interior of the mansion told two conflicting stories. The main rooms showcased opulent wealth with antique furniture and priceless art, while security monitors and armed men revealed the true nature of the business conducted within these walls. Bailey clutched her bag tighter, the letter safely tucked inside. "You came," Jack observed from the doorway of his study, his casual posture belied by the intensity of his gaze as he assessed her. Something in his expression suggested he hadn't been entirely certain she would accept his proposition despite the financial incentive. Bailey straightened her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated despite the fear crawling beneath her skin. "I need to understand what I'm getting into before I agree to anything more than reading this letter," she stated firmly, surprising herself with her own boldness. A ghost of a smile touched Jack's lips as he gestured for her to enter his private study, a room lined with books that, unlike many wealthy collectors, showed signs of having been read. "Caution is wise when dealing with men like me, Ms. Porter. Perhaps wiser than accepting my offer in the first place." The elderly man waiting inside the study rose slowly from his chair, his weathered face lighting with interest as Bailey entered. "This is Professor Marino, an expert in Sicilian history and language," Jack explained, closing the door with a soft click that somehow felt like a lock engaging. Professor Marino's kind eyes crinkled behind thick glasses as he extended gnarled fingers toward the letter Bailey cautiously removed from her bag. "I can help with translation, but the dialect is so specific to Jack's family region that only someone with the right lineage can truly understand the nuances." Bailey watched as the professor examined the first page, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he read. "This is more complicated than I expected," he murmured, glancing up at Jack with undisguised concern. "It's written in a family cipher as well as dialect, a double layer of protection for whatever secrets it contains." 3 days later, Bailey found herself installed in a guest room at Jack's estate, surrounded by language books and audio recordings as she immersed herself in the ancient dialect. Professor Marino had created an intensive crash course, impressed by her natural aptitude for language that she had never had the opportunity to develop. Jack appeared sporadically, sometimes watching her study in silence before disappearing again into whatever business occupied his days and nights. Bailey noticed the tension that never left his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned for threats, even within his own heavily guarded home. The household staff treated Bailey with a mixture of curiosity and caution, clearly unsure of her status within their employer's world. Only Mrs. Harding, the elderly housekeeper, showed genuine warmth, bringing extra blankets and home-cooked meals when Bailey worked late into the night. "My grandfather built this house," Jack explained one evening as they walked the perimeter of the property, security guards maintaining a respectful distance. "He came to America with nothing but determination and a talent for making powerful friends and dangerous enemies." Bailey absorbed the information, while observing how Jack's demeanor changed when speaking of his grandfather, the hardness in his eyes softening almost imperceptibly. "Was he involved in the same business as you?" she asked carefully, aware she was treading into potentially dangerous territory. A bitter laugh escaped Jack's throat as he gestured toward the city lights glimmering in the distance. "My grandfather started with protection rackets and gambling, but he had vision. He understood that real power meant eventually becoming legitimate, a transformation I haven't quite achieved." Fragments of the letter had begun to make sense, as Bailey's understanding of the dialect improved, revealing tantalizing glimpses of family secrets, betrayals, and possibly a fortune hidden decades ago. The more she deciphered, the more she understood Jack's desperation to know its contents. "Why didn't your grandfather simply tell you these things before he died?" Bailey asked one night, looking up from her notes to find Jack watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. The question had been bothering her from the beginning of this strange arrangement. Jack's fingers traced the scar along his jawline, a habit Bailey had noticed emerged when he was contemplating something painful. We hadn't spoken in 5 years, not since I took the family business in a direction he considered dishonorable, choosing power over the legacy he wanted to build. Bailey was startled awake that night by raised voices echoing through the mansion's corridors, followed by the sound of breaking glass and hurried footsteps. Carefully opening her door, she glimpsed men in suits escorting someone with a bloodied face toward Jack's private office. The next morning, tension pervaded the house like a physical presence, staff moving efficiently but silently through their duties, avoiding eye contact. Bailey found Jack in his study, knuckles bruised and expression remote as he stared out the window at nothing in particular. "This is the world you're in now," he stated without turning, somehow aware of her presence despite her silent approach. "You should understand what that means before we go any further. There are rival families who would kill for what might be in that letter, people who've been watching since my grandfather's death." Fear coiled in Bailey's stomach as the full implications of her situation crystallized with terrifying clarity. She was no longer just a waitress earning extra money through an unusual translation job. She had become a potential target simply by knowing Jack Kalari. Mrs. Harding appeared at Bailey's door that afternoon, her usually calm demeanor replaced with urgency. "Mr. Kalari wants you ready to travel in 30 minutes, she explained, already pulling clothes from the wardrobe. "There's been an incident. You're being moved to a safer location." Bailey's hands trembled as she packed her notes and the original letter, the partially translated sections revealing a story far more complex than a simple inheritance. Jack's grandfather had hidden something valuable enough to kill for, something that could potentially rewrite the future of the Kalari family. The cabin nestled in the Appalachian foothills appeared abandoned from the outside, its weathered exterior concealing state-of-the-art security measures that Jack activated with practiced efficiency. Inside, the space was surprisingly comfortable, stocked with provisions and equipped with communication technology hidden behind rustic decor. "My grandfather built these safe houses across 3 states, Jack explained, securing the perimeter while Bailey unpacked her translation materials. "He always planned for betrayal, even from those closest to him. A lesson I should have remembered sooner." Bailey spread her notes across the wooden table, organizing the fragments she'd already translated alongside the original letter. The pattern was becoming clearer. Not just a message, but a map encoded in familial references and childhood memories, known only to those with intimate knowledge of Kalari history. "Someone in your organization is feeding information to a rival family," Bailey observed, connecting details from overheard conversations with portions of the letter that mentioned a traitor within the inner circle. Jack's expression darkened as he processed her conclusion, recognizing the truth in her words. The cabin's generator hummed softly in the background as they worked through the night, Bailey reading passages aloud while Jack filled in context from stories his grandfather had shared during his childhood. Their breath fogged in the chilly air as the heating system struggled against the mountain cold. "He mentions a woman named Lucia repeatedly," Bailey noted, circling a name that appeared throughout the text. "Someone significant to him, though he never directly explains who she was to him, just that she helped hide something valuable." Jack's eyes widened with recognition, his finger tracing the name on the page. Lucia wasn't his lover as everyone assumed. She was his half-sister, kept secret to protect her from family enemies after their father was killed in a blood feud that followed them from Sicily. As dawn broke over the mountains, casting long shadows through the cabin windows, Bailey translated a passage that made Jack fall completely silent. "Your father's heart was always divided between power and art, a conflict I recognized in you before you could speak, my blood and your grandmother's spirit warring within your soul. My father was a painter before he took over the family business," Jack whispered, voice uncharacteristically vulnerable as he pulled a worn photograph from his wallet. "He gave it up when his older brother was killed, abandoning his true passion to become something he despised out of duty." The letter described a fortune hidden not in money or property as Jack had assumed, but in a collection of Renaissance art, stolen during World War II, and secretly repatriated by Jack's grandfather decades later. The collection remained hidden in a location known only to the old man and Lucia, who had maintained its secret until her death the previous year. "He didn't want these paintings sold or kept from the world any longer," Bailey translated, piecing together the old man's final wishes. "He arranged for their return to their rightful owners or museums, with one condition, that you personally oversee the process as a path toward legitimacy." A satellite phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the reverent silence that had fallen between them as they absorbed the implications of the discovery. Jack answered tersely, his expression hardening as he received news from Cleveland, eyes locked with Bailey's as her stomach knotted with dread. "My right-hand man was found dead an hour ago," he informed her after ending the call, calculation replacing vulnerability as he mentally shifted back into the role of boss. "The only people who knew we were coming here were in my inner circle, people I've trusted for years." The final pages of the letter contained not just the location of the art collection, but evidence implicating several of Jack's most trusted lieutenants in a conspiracy with a rival family. His grandfather had been gathering intelligence, even while estranged from Jack, protecting him from afar despite their bitter falling out. Bailey completed the translation, as afternoon shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, her voice growing hoarse as she read the final passage. "The true inheritance I leave you isn't wealth or power, but the chance to become the man I always saw in you, one who builds rather than destroys, who leaves a legacy worth claiming." The return journey to Cleveland unfolded under cover of darkness, utilizing back roads and switching vehicles twice to evade potential surveillance. Bailey noticed how Jack's demeanor had transformed. Gone was the brooding mafia boss, replaced by a strategist with clarity of purpose and a newfound determination. "We can't trust anyone until we identify all the conspirators," Jack murmured as they approached the city limits, the dashboard lights illuminating the hard angles of his face. "My grandfather named 3 traitors, but there could be more, which means you're still in danger by association." Rather than returning to the mansion, Jack brought Bailey to a modest apartment building owned by Mrs. Harding's sister, an unassuming location outside his usual territory. The simple 2-bedroom unit felt impossibly safe after the tension of recent days, though Bailey knew this was merely an illusion. "I've arranged for your daughter to join you here tomorrow," Jack informed her, checking sightlines from each window before drawing the blinds. "Your mother has been moved to a private medical facility under a different name. Better care and better security until this is resolved." Gratitude welled in Bailey's chest, temporarily overwhelming her fear, as she realized Jack had considered her family's safety without being asked. She had glimpsed the man beneath the criminal exterior, someone capable of compassion alongside calculation, humanity beneath the hardened facade. The next morning brought Zoe's delighted squeals as she explored the new apartment, blissfully unaware of the circumstances that had led to this unexpected change. Bailey watched her daughter with a mixture of love and apprehension, wondering what future she had inadvertently chosen for them both. Jack arrived that evening accompanied by a distinguished older man who Bailey recognized from news coverage, Judge William Preston, whose reputation for incorruptibility was legendary in Cleveland's judicial circles. The 2 men carried themselves with the gravity of those about to alter the course of many lives. "The judge has agreed to help establish provenance for the art collection and create a legal framework for its return," Jack explained, spreading documents across the dining table while the judge examined Bailey with unconcealed curiosity. "He's also our insurance policy. His knowledge of what we're doing protects us all." Judge Preston cleared his throat, his patrician features arranged in an expression of cautious optimism. "What Mr. Kalari is attempting is unprecedented, the legitimate return of priceless artifacts while simultaneously dismantling criminal enterprises that have operated for generations in this city." The quiet domestic scene was shattered by the staccato crack of gunfire from the street below, bullets splintering the window frame as Bailey instinctively grabbed Zoe and pulled her to the floor. Jack moved with surprising speed, weapon drawn as he positioned himself between them and the broken window. Judge Preston's security detail burst through the door, creating a human barrier as they evacuated the apartment through a service entrance Jack had already identified as an escape route. Bailey clutched Zoe to her chest, the child's terrified sobs muffled against her shoulder as they fled into the night. "It's Paul," Jack growled after ending a brief phone call, his knuckles white around the steering wheel as they sped toward the outskirts of town. "My cousin, my father's brother's son. He's the 4th conspirator my grandfather didn't identify, probably because of family loyalty." The safe house this time was a converted industrial space above a printing company, the entire block owned through a shell corporation not connected to the Kalari family. Judge Preston departed with his security team after ensuring their safety, carrying copies of the translated letter and documentation of the hidden art collection. Bailey settled an exhausted Zoe into an improvised bed, singing softly until the child's breathing deepened into sleep, unaware of Jack watching from the doorway. The tenderness in his expression vanished instantly when their eyes met, replaced by the mask he wore so comfortably. "Tomorrow we retrieve the art collection," he stated simply, his tone leaving no room for discussion. as he checked his weapon with practiced efficiency. "After that, I deal with the traitors permanently, and you take your family and disappear with enough money to start over somewhere safe." Dawn painted the abandoned church in muted gold as Jack and Bailey approached cautiously, the Renaissance treasure hidden beneath its crumbling foundations for decades. The letter had described a secret entrance through the old confessional, a passage known only to Jack's grandfather and the priest who had helped conceal the artwork. "My grandfather came here every Sunday until the church closed," Jack murmured, his fingers tracing the worn wood of the pew where the old man had faithfully sat for years. Everyone thought he was atoning for his sins, but he was actually guarding this place. The hidden chamber beneath the altar revealed a climate-controlled vault that had preserved dozens of masterpieces, Botticelli's, Caravaggios, and Raphael's, arranged with reverent care alongside meticulous documentation of their provenance and rightful ownership. Jack stood motionless before the collection, overwhelmed by his grandfather's foresight and vision. "He wanted to be sure you'd understand why this matters," Bailey said softly, reading from the final page of the letter she had brought with them. "These paintings aren't just valuable. They're pieces of cultural heritage that belong to humanity, not locked away in private collections." The sharp click of a gun's safety being disengaged echoed through the chamber, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps on the stone stairs behind them. Paul Kalari emerged from the shadows, flanked by two men with weapons trained on Jack and Bailey, his handsome face twisted with contempt. "Always the favorite, even after betraying everything our family built," Paul spat, circling them slowly as his men secured the perimeter. "Uncle Gio left you an empire, and you've been systematically dismantling it for years. And now this final insult, giving away treasures that should belong to us." Jack shifted imperceptibly, positioning himself between Bailey and his cousin's weapon, his expression betraying nothing as he assessed their options. "Our grandfather wanted legitimacy, Paul, something your father never understood either, which is why he passed you over for succession." Paul's laugh held no humor as he gestured toward the priceless paintings surrounding them. "The Donato family has offered me 10 million for your head and whatever treasure you found. More than enough to rebuild what you've weakened with your ridiculous notions of going legitimate. You won't leave this place alive if you harm either of us," Jack replied, his voice deadly calm as he nodded toward the ceiling where a small red light blinked steadily. "Judge Preston is monitoring this location through cameras I installed yesterday. Everything you've said has been recorded." Bailey watched the color drain from Paul's face as police sirens wailed in the distance, growing steadily louder as they approached the abandoned church. Jack had orchestrated this confrontation deliberately, using himself and the art collection as bait to draw out the final traitor. The ensuing chaos unfolded with nightmarish speed, Paul lunging forward with a roar of rage, the thunder of gunshots reverberating through the chamber, and Jack collapsing to his knees as blood bloomed across his chest. Bailey screamed as police tactical teams swarmed the underground vault, subduing Paul and his men with practiced efficiency. Judge Preston appeared at Bailey's side as paramedics worked frantically to stabilize Jack, his judicial demeanor momentarily abandoned as genuine concern creased his features. He knew this was the only way to end it completely, to cut out the cancer within his organization while documenting the art's return. Days blurred together as Bailey maintained vigil beside Jack's hospital bed, her daughter coloring quietly in a chair by the window under the watchful eye of plainclothes officers. The news had exploded with coverage of the recovered artwork and the dramatic dismantling of two major crime families. Jack regained consciousness gradually, his usual intensity dimmed by pain and medication, as his eyes focused on Bailey with unexpected vulnerability. "You stayed," he observed, voice barely above a whisper as he reached for her hand, with fingers weakened by blood loss and trauma. "You nearly died protecting me," Bailey replied simply, allowing her fingers to intertwine with his despite the complications such a gesture implied. "And I wanted to be here when you finally fulfilled your grandfather's last wish. The press is calling you a hero for returning the art." The sunlight streaming through the hospital window illuminated the future taking shape between them, uncertain and dangerous still, but filled with possibilities neither had imagined when a cruel challenge had been issued in a Cleveland restaurant. The path to redemption had begun with a letter neither could read alone, but together had changed everything. Recovery transformed Jack Kalari in ways neither he nor Bailey had anticipated. The brush with mortality stripping away layers of hardened cynicism to reveal glimpses of the man his grandfather had always seen. The hospital room became an unlikely command center as he directed the legitimate aspects of his business empire from his bed, restructuring operations with Judge Preston's guidance. The Sicilian letter wasn't just about the art collection, Bailey realized one evening as she reviewed their translation notes, seeing connections that had previously eluded her. Your grandfather created a comprehensive blueprint for transitioning the entire Caleri organization into legitimate businesses. Jack nodded, wincing slightly as he adjusted his position against the pillows, still healing from the bullet that had narrowly missed his heart. The old man mapped everything: property holdings that could be converted to community developments, shipping routes that could transport legal goods, political connections that could be leveraged for neighborhood improvements. Federal agents had established a perimeter around the hospital floor, not to monitor Jack, but to protect him from the remaining elements of the Donato family who had placed a substantial bounty on his head. The irony wasn't lost on Bailey. The man she'd once feared was now under government protection as a cooperating witness. My grandfather left evidence against every corrupt official and police officer on our payroll, Jack explained as he signed immunity agreements that would shield him from prosecution in exchange for his testimony. He was playing a much longer game than anyone realized, gathering leverage while planning his legacy's transformation. Bailey's mother had been moved to the same private hospital, her treatments showing promising results under the care of specialists Jack had arranged before his injury. The two patients often spent afternoons together in the sunroom, the older woman treating the feared mafia boss with the same maternal warmth she extended to everyone. The media portrayed Jack as a complex figure, part villain seeking redemption, part hero returning stolen treasures, creating a mythology around the Caleri transformation that captivated the public imagination. Headlines alternated between scrutinizing his criminal past and celebrating his unlikely conversion. Bailey found herself in an impossible position, caught between her growing feelings for Jack and the reality of who he had been, perhaps still was beneath the veneer of legitimacy. She watched him speaking with federal prosecutors, his charisma evident even in this context, and wondered if people truly could rewrite their own stories. What happens when you're fully recovered? She asked one night after Zoe had fallen asleep in the chair beside Jack's bed, the child having formed an unexpected attachment to the man who spoke to her without condescension and produced coins magically from behind her ears. Jack's fingers traced idle patterns on the bedsheet as he considered her question, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. There's a villa in Tuscany that belonged to my grandmother, remote enough to be safe, close enough to museums where some of the artwork will be displayed. You're leaving Cleveland, Bailey stated flatly, surprising herself with the disappointment that colored her voice despite knowing this outcome was inevitable. A man with Jack's history and enemies couldn't simply retire to suburban life in Ohio, regardless of his cooperation with authorities. The hard-won vulnerability in Jack's eyes made Bailey's heart stutter as he reached for her hand. I'm offering you a choice, he said quietly, voice stripped of its usual commanding tone. Come with me. You, Zoe, your mother. Start fresh somewhere beautiful where no one knows our history. Conflict played across Bailey's features as she absorbed his words, weighing the safety and comfort he offered against the reality of building a life with a former crime boss, however reformed. I can't uproot my family on impulse. We hardly know each other beyond extraordinary circumstances. Jack's smile held a trace of sadness as he released her hand, respecting her hesitation without attempting to overcome it. Then we'll use the time we have left here to discover who we are without danger forcing us together. No pressure, just possibility. 3 months passed in relative calm as Jack continued his recovery, dividing his time between physical therapy and meetings with government officials who were dismantling his criminal networks using information he provided. The mansion had been sold, its proceeds establishing a foundation for at-risk youth in Cleveland's poorest neighborhoods. Bailey had returned to work, though not as a waitress. Judge Preston's wife had offered her a position managing their charitable foundation, recognizing her organizational skills and integrity. The judge himself had become an unlikely mentor to Jack, guiding him through the complex legal process of separating legitimate businesses from criminal enterprises. The calm shattered one Tuesday afternoon when Bailey returned from lunch to find Mrs. Harding waiting in her office, the housekeeper's normally composed features tight with worry. They found 3 of Donato's men scoping out Zoe's daycare center this morning, she reported, her voice barely above a whisper. Bailey's world narrowed to a pinpoint of terror as she grabbed her phone, fingers trembling as she dialed Jack's number while gathering her purse and keys. His response was immediate and decisive. A security team was already at the daycare, another en route to collect her mother from physical therapy. "I can have you on a private plane within 2 hours," Jack stated without preamble when he arrived at her office, the scar along his jawline standing out starkly against his pale skin. "The Donatos are making their move before my testimony next week. They'll target anyone connected to me." Preparations unfolded with military precision, as Jack activated contingency plans he'd developed during his recovery, anticipating this inevitable retaliation from rivals who viewed his cooperation with authorities as the ultimate betrayal. Bank accounts were transferred, documents prepared, arrangements finalized in a whirlwind of activity. Bailey watched as Jack coordinated their escape with the same intensity he had once directed criminal operations, recognizing that this skill for strategy and foresight was neutral in itself, neither good nor evil, but defined by how it was applied. Today, it was being used to save her family. "The Donatos have a source inside the U.S. Marshall's office," Jack informed her, as they rendezvoused at a private airstrip outside the city, Zoe clutching her favorite stuffed animal, while Bailey's mother was carefully settled into a comfortable seat on the waiting plane. "We can't rely on witness protection. We need to disappear completely." Judge Preston arrived minutes before their scheduled departure, his judicial demeanor momentarily abandoned, as he embraced Jack with genuine affection. "The art repatriation ceremony is tomorrow in New York. I'll be delivering your statement personally to explain your absence." The tarmac erupted in chaos as black SUVs crashed through the perimeter fence, men with automatic weapons pouring out while airport security scrambled to respond. Jack shoved Bailey toward the plane's stairs, positioning himself between her family and the approaching threat with practiced calculation. Federal agents emerged from concealed positions, engaging the Donato gunmen in a firefight that transformed the private airstrip into a war zone of muzzle flashes and shouted commands. Jack used the distraction to hustle Bailey's mother up the stairs, his expression betraying no fear, despite the bullets whining past. "I need to end this," Jack stated with quiet determination once Bailey and her family were secure inside the aircraft, his hand already reaching for the door handle to return to the firefight below. "As long as the Donatos remain in power, you'll never truly be safe. Not in Italy, not anywhere." The standoff lasted mere seconds before Jack yielded, recognizing in Bailey's determination the same unyielding spirit his grandfather had possessed, the ability to bend without breaking, to find a third option when only 2 impossible choices seemed available. He nodded once, accepting her terms as the plane's engines roared to life. Judge Preston's security team created a defensive perimeter that allowed the aircraft to taxi toward the runway, federal agents gradually gaining ground against the Donato attackers, who found themselves outmatched and outgunned. The judge himself stood watching as the plane lifted off, carrying his unlikely allies toward an uncertain future. Morning light spilled across terracotta tiles as Bailey opened the shutters of their Tuscan villa, breathing in the scent of lavender and rosemary that drifted up from the gardens below. 6 months had passed since their dramatic escape from Cleveland, each day putting more distance between them and the violence that had marked their meeting. Jack's testimony, delivered via secure video link to grand juries across 3 states, had led to the indictment of 47 individuals connected to organized crime in Cleveland, including the entirety of the Donato family leadership. The man who had once ruled that criminal world now spent his mornings teaching Zoe to play chess in the villa's sunlit courtyard. Bailey's mother had flourished in the Mediterranean climate, her cancer in remission as she tended the villa's extensive herb gardens and practiced her faltering Italian with neighbors who had embraced the American family without question. The peaceful routine of their days bore no resemblance to the chaos that had brought them together. Professor Marino had joined them in Tuscany, establishing a small research institute dedicated to identifying and repatriating looted artwork from private collections worldwide. The expertise Jack had developed through his grandfather's collection made him an invaluable consultant to museums and law enforcement agencies specializing in art theft. "The Uffizi ceremony is tomorrow," Bailey reminded Jack as she joined him for coffee on the terrace, the newspaper before him featuring an article about the final pieces from his grandfather's collection being officially returned to the famous Florence Museum. Local officials had requested his presence despite his complicated history. Jack's hand covered hers, the calluses from his newfound interest in stone carving rough against her skin. "Are you ready to be seen publicly with me?" he asked, the vulnerability in his question revealing how much her answer mattered to him. "There will be press coverage, questions about our history. I'm not ashamed of our story," she replied, squeezing his hand, as Zoe raced across the garden chasing butterflies, her laughter carrying on the warm breeze. It's messy and complicated, but it's real, and it brought us here, to something neither of us could have imagined that night in the restaurant. Their relationship had developed slowly, deliberately, built on shared experiences and mutual respect, rather than the adrenaline-fueled intensity of their early days. Jack had given Bailey space to decide what she wanted without pressure, while demonstrating through consistent actions that his transformation was genuine. The villa's phone rang, interrupting their moment of connection. Judge Preston calling with news that the final Donato associate had been apprehended attempting to flee to South America. The threat that had hung over them since leaving Cleveland was finally, definitively neutralized after months of looking over their shoulders. "We're free to choose what comes next," Jack observed after ending the call, his expression lightened by the removal of this last shadow from their past. The question of their future together hung unspoken between them, neither rushing to define what had grown organically between them. Bailey watched as her daughter climbed onto Jack's lap, demanding that he identify the butterfly species she had been chasing through the garden. The tenderness in his expression as he patiently explained the differences between European and American varieties revealed more about his transformation than any grand gesture could have done. Later that evening, as Mediterranean stars appeared above the ancient olive trees surrounding the villa, Jack led Bailey to his workshop, where a stone sculpture stood partially completed. "It's us," he explained, gesturing to the 3 intertwined figures emerging from rough marble. "Not who we were, but who we're becoming together." Bailey traced the contours of the sculpture, recognizing the symbolic representation of their unlikely family, 3 separate individuals whose lives had become inexplicably, permanently intertwined. "Your grandfather would be proud of this legacy," she whispered, understanding now why the old man had gone to such lengths to create this possibility. Jack pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain as he held it out to her. "I'm not asking for an answer now," he clarified quickly, opening it to reveal a vintage ring with a history he proceeded to explain. "It belonged to my grandmother, the one person who always saw past my grandfather's reputation to the man beneath." The symbolism wasn't lost on Bailey as she carefully removed the ring, its delicate craftsmanship catching the last light of sunset streaming through the workshop windows. Like the letter that had brought them together, this was another piece of Callery history being offered as a bridge between past and future. Thank you all for following this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is crucial for me to continue creating content here.